The story begins on what seemed like a perfectly ordinary Saturday afternoon. The sun was shining, and the air carried the faint scent of freshly cut grass as Sarah, a hard-working single mother, decided to take her two children to the local mall for some much-needed family time. Her youngest, Ethan, was a bright and curious 10-year-old who had cerebral palsy. Though his condition meant he relied on a wheelchair to get around, it didn't stop him from enjoying life or finding joy in the little things. One of his favorite activities was watching people at the mall, observing their expressions, guessing where they were headed, and imagining their stories. Sarah made sure everything was ready before heading out. She packed Ethan's favorite snacks, double-checked that his wheelchair was secure in the car, and ensured there was plenty of room for her older daughter, Mia, to sit comfortably. When they arrived at the mall, she carefully chose a parking spot near the entrance, ensuring it was spacious enough for Ethan's wheelchair. As they stepped out of the car, Ethan grinned up at his mom, excited about the day ahead. "I'm gonna see all the cool stuff today," he said, his voice full of enthusiasm. But just as Sarah was helping Ethan into his wheelchair, a sleek luxury car pulled into the handicapped parking spot right next to theirs. Out stepped Karen, a middle-aged woman with perfectly styled hair, designer sunglasses perched on her nose, and an expensive handbag slung over her shoulder. She glanced briefly at Ethan in his wheelchair, but didn't say a word. Instead, she strutted toward the mall entrance, her heels clicking loudly against the pavement. Something about her demeanor felt off, like she thought the world revolved around her. But Sarah shrugged it off. After all, they were here to have fun, not worry about strangers. Once inside, the family split up briefly. Sarah took Mia to run a quick errand at a nearby store while Ethan stayed behind, happily spinning his wheelchair in slow circles near the entrance, waving at passing shoppers. It was only supposed to be a few minutes, but when Sarah returned, she immediately noticed something was wrong. Her heart sank as she saw Karen standing by her car, her face red with fury. Apparently, while Sarah had been loading bags into the trunk, Ethan's wheelchair had accidentally bumped into Karen's shiny car. It was such a minor scrape that you could barely notice it unless you looked closely, but Karen wasn't interested in calm explanations. She began yelling loudly, accusing Sarah of being careless and irresponsible. Passers-by stopped to watch, some whispering among themselves about how over-the-top Karen's reaction seemed. Sarah tried to stay composed, apologizing profusely and offering to exchange insurance information. But Karen wasn't having any of it. Her voice grew louder, more aggressive, and soon she was pacing back and forth, pointing fingers and making wild accusations. The situation was spiraling out of control, and Sarah couldn't believe how quickly things had escalated over something so trivial. Little did she know, this confrontation was far from over, and it would soon take a turn no one could have predicted. Karen's tirade only grew louder as the seconds ticked by, her voice cutting through the hum of shoppers and echoing across the parking lot. She stood with her arms crossed, glaring at Sarah like she was some kind of villain who had deliberately plotted to ruin her day. "Do you have any idea how much this car costs?" Karen demanded, jabbing a finger toward her luxury vehicle. Her tone dripped with disdain, as if the price tag of her car somehow justified her outrage over a tiny scratch that wouldn't even show up in photos. Sarah, trying her best to remain calm despite the rising tension, held up both hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm really sorry," she said firmly but politely. "It was an accident. I'll take full responsibility. Let me give you my insurance information, and we can sort this out." But Karen wasn't interested in solutions. She wanted drama. With each passing moment, her words became sharper, more biting. "You think insurance is going to fix everything?" she snapped. "What about the principle of the matter? Do you just let your kid run wild without supervision?" That comment stung. Sarah felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment and anger, not because of what Karen said, but because Ethan was sitting right there, listening to every word. He looked down at his lap, clearly hurt by the accusation. Sarah took a deep breath, reminding herself that losing her temper wouldn't help anyone. "My son has cerebral palsy," she explained patiently. "He uses a wheelchair, and yes, sometimes accidents happen. But it's not like we did this on purpose. We're happy to make things right." But Karen wasn't listening. If anything, Sarah's explanation seemed to fuel her fury even more. "Oh, so now I'm the bad guy for calling out bad parenting?" Karen shot back, throwing her hands in the air dramatically. By now, a small crowd had gathered, drawn by the commotion. Some people exchanged uneasy glances, while others pulled out their phones to record the scene. One older man stepped forward cautiously, attempting to mediate. "Ma'am, maybe you should calm down," he suggested gently. But Karen brushed him off with a wave of her hand. "Stay out of this," she barked. "This doesn't concern you." As the confrontation dragged on, Sarah noticed something shift in Karen's demeanor. Her face turned redder, her jaw clenched tighter, and her movements became jerky and erratic. It was as though she'd completely lost control of her emotions, or perhaps she never had them under control to begin with. And then came the moment that no one saw coming. Without warning, Karen reached into her purse and pulled out a small canister. At first, Sarah didn't realize what it was. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice tinged with alarm. Before anyone could react, Karen uncapped the canister and pointed it directly at Ethan. "This is what happens when irresponsible parents don't keep their kids in line," she shouted, her voice shrill and unhinged. In an instant, chaos erupted. The pepper spray hit Ethan square in the face, causing him to scream in pain and clutch his eyes. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he coughed violently, struggling to breathe. Sarah froze for half a second, shock rooting her to the spot, before instinct kicked in. She rushed to her son's side, pulling him away from Karen as quickly as she could. The crowd gasped in horror. A few brave bystanders stepped forward to shield Sarah and Ethan, forming a protective barrier between them and Karen. Someone called security, while another person flagged down a nearby paramedic team that happened to be stationed at the mall. Through it all, Karen stood there, still clutching the canister, looking almost surprised by the magnitude of her own actions. For a brief moment, there was silence, a stunned pause where everyone processed what had just happened. Then, as reality set in, the murmurs began. "Did she really just do that?" one woman whispered, "to a child in a wheelchair." The situation had spiraled far beyond a simple argument over a minor car scratch. What started as a tense disagreement had devolved into something far more sinister, and nothing would ever be the same again. As Ethan coughed and cried, the scene around them transformed into a frenzy of activity. Sarah cradled her son tightly, her heart pounding as she tried to shield him from further harm. "It's okay, baby," she whispered frantically, wiping his tear-streaked face with her sleeve. "You're going to be okay." But inside, she was seething. How could someone do this to a child? To her child. Her hands trembled as she fumbled for her phone to call 911, but before she could dial, several bystanders stepped in to help. One man, a tall guy wearing a baseball cap, gently pushed Karen back, putting distance between her and the family. "That's enough," he barked, his voice firm and commanding. Karen faltered for a moment, looking shocked by the sudden resistance. Another woman knelt beside Sarah, offering tissues and soothing words. "I'm so sorry this happened," she said softly, her eyes filled with concern. "Let me help you." Meanwhile, other shoppers began recording the chaos on their phones. The sight of a grown woman wielding pepper spray against a disabled child was too shocking to ignore. People shouted at Karen, their voices rising in unison. "Are you serious right now?" One man yelled. "What is wrong with you?" A mother holding her own toddler looked visibly shaken, muttering under her breath about how horrifying it was to witness such cruelty. Within moments, the parking lot had turned into a sea of angry faces, all directed at Karen. Security guards arrived quickly, alerted by frantic calls from witnesses. Two uniformed officers jogged toward the scene, their radios crackling with updates. One of them immediately approached Karen, demanding that she drop the pepper spray canister. She hesitated for a second, clutching it like it was some kind of trophy, but eventually handed it over with a huff. She started it. Karen protested loudly, pointing an accusing finger at Sarah. Her voice dripped with indignation, as if she truly believed she was the victim here. Her kid damaged my car. The guards didn't buy it. They escorted Karen away from the crowd, keeping her at a safe distance while they assessed the situation. Meanwhile, paramedics rushed to Ethan's side, checking his vitals and gently cleaning his eyes with saline solution. Though he was still coughing and clearly in pain, the worst seemed to have passed. "He's going to be all right," one of the medics assured Sarah, though she couldn't stop shaking. "Just keep him calm and hydrated for the next few hours." By now, news of the incident had spread throughout the mall. Shoppers gathered in clusters, whispering about what had happened. Some expressed outrage, others disbelief. Who does something like that? One teenager asked her friend, shaking her head, to a kid in a wheelchair. "That's insane." Even employees working nearby came outside to see what was going on, many of them visibly upset by the confrontation. As the commotion died down slightly, Sarah finally had a chance to catch her breath. Sitting on the curb with Ethan resting against her chest, she glanced up at the growing crowd. Despite everything, she felt a strange sense of gratitude, not for what had happened, but for the outpouring of support from strangers. These people didn't know her or Ethan, yet they'd stepped up when it mattered most. Someone pressed a bottle of water into her hand, while another offered to drive her home if needed. It was a small reminder that even in the darkest moments, kindness still existed. But as grateful as she was, Sarah couldn't shake the image of Karen standing there, unrepentant and defiant. How could someone justify using violence against a child? And what would happen next? As the security guards led Karen toward the mall office for questioning, Sarah knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Whatever unfolded from here, one thing was certain: justice needed to be served. For Ethan, for herself, and for every person who'd been forced to watch such a cruel act unfold. Within hours, the video of Karen's shocking actions had gone viral. The footage, captured by multiple bystanders, painted a vivid and horrifying picture. A grown woman losing control over a minor car scratch and resorting to unthinkable cruelty against a child in a wheelchair. Social media platforms lit up with outrage as people from all corners of the internet shared their reactions. Hashtags like #JusticeForThan and #KarmaForKaren began trending, drawing millions of views and comments. For many, it was impossible to watch the clip without feeling a mix of anger, disbelief, and heartbreak. The video showed everything: the initial argument, Karen's escalating aggression, and the moment she pulled out the pepper spray. Viewers were particularly struck by Ethan's screams and Sarah's desperate attempts to protect him. "This is beyond cruel," one commenter wrote. "How can someone live with themselves after doing something like this?" Another added, "That poor boy didn't deserve any of this. His mom was calm and trying to fix things, but Karen just lost her mind." As the story gained traction, details about Karen's life started surfacing online. Someone recognized her luxury car and posted her license plate number, which led to her being identified within hours. Others dug deeper, uncovering that she worked as a high-profile executive at a major corporation. Screenshots of her LinkedIn profile spread across social media, along with photos of her posing beside expensive cars and designer handbags. To many, these images only fueled their anger. How could someone who seemingly had so much act with such callousness? News outlets picked up the story almost immediately, turning it into national headlines. Reporters camped outside Karen's house, hoping to get a statement or glimpse of her reaction. Her employer, eager to distance itself from the controversy, released a public statement condemning her behavior. "We do not tolerate acts of violence or discrimination in any form," the statement read. While we respect due process, we are deeply disturbed by these allegations and have suspended Karen pending further investigation. By Monday morning, the company announced her termination, citing her actions as incompatible with their values. But the backlash didn't stop there. Hackers targeted Karen's personal accounts, leaking private messages and embarrassing photos online. One screenshot showed her bragging about using her wealth to intimidate others in past disputes. Another revealed insensitive remarks she'd made about disabled individuals, calling them a burden on society. These revelations only deepened the public's disgust, making it clear that her actions at the mall weren't an isolated incident. They were part of a pattern of entitlement and cruelty. Local law enforcement took swift action, charging Karen with assault, reckless endangerment, and possession of pepper spray without a permit. When questioned by police, Karen claimed self-defense, insisting that she felt threatened by Sarah and her son. But her excuses fell flat, especially when confronted with overwhelming evidence from witnesses and security cameras. Prosecutors vowed to pursue the case aggressively, ensuring that Karen faced consequences for her actions. Despite the mounting pressure, Karen refused to apologize publicly. In fact, she doubled down on her version of events during an impromptu interview with a local news crew. "I'm the real victim here," she declared, visibly frustrated. "People are blowing this out of proportion because they don't understand what really happened." Her tone was defensive, bordering on dismissive, and viewers were quick to call her out. "She still doesn't get it," one person tweeted. No remorse whatsoever. As the days passed, Karen became a pariah. Friends and acquaintances distanced themselves from her, fearing association with someone whose name had become synonymous with cruelty. Her once perfect life unraveled before the world's eyes, leaving her isolated and humiliated. Meanwhile, support for Sarah and Ethan continued to pour in. Strangers sent heartfelt messages, donations flooded in to help cover medical expenses, and organizations reached out offering resources for Ethan's care. What had started as a nightmare was slowly transforming into a testament to resilience, and a reminder that even in the face of darkness, compassion and justice could prevail. In the days following the incident, Sarah and Ethan found themselves at the center of an outpouring of love and support that neither of them could have anticipated. Donations poured in from all over the country, with people sending money to help cover Ethan's medical bills and other expenses. A crowdfunding campaign set up by a kind-hearted stranger quickly surpassed its goal, raising tens of thousands of dollars within just 48 hours. The funds weren't just for immediate needs. They allowed Sarah to purchase a custom-built wheelchair for Ethan, one designed specifically to provide him with greater comfort and mobility. The community rallied around them in ways that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. Local businesses organized fundraisers, hosting bake sales, car washes, and charity events to show their solidarity. One restaurant even donated a portion of its weekend profits to the family, while another offered free meals whenever they visited. Neighbors who had barely spoken to Sarah before now stopped by her house with groceries, homemade meals, and heartfelt notes of encouragement. Even Mia, Ethan's older sister, received messages of support from classmates who admired how strong their family was staying through such a difficult time. Ethan, though still shaken by the attack, began to feel the warmth of this collective kindness. Strangers sent him letters and drawings, many of them addressed directly to him. "You're so brave," one note read. "Don't let anyone make you feel small. You are amazing just the way you are." Another included a colorful drawing of a superhero in a wheelchair, captioned, "To Ethan, my hero." These small gestures meant the world to him, helping him regain some of the confidence he'd lost after being pepper sprayed. Slowly but surely, his laughter returned, and he started spinning his wheelchair again, just like he used to. Sarah, too, felt a renewed sense of hope as she navigated interviews and public appearances to share their story. Though it was painful to relive the events of that day, she wanted people to understand the importance of empathy and forgiveness. During one interview, she spoke candidly about her emotions, how angry and helpless she'd felt when Karen turned on her son, and how grateful she was for the overwhelming support they'd received since. "It's easy to focus on the bad things in life," she told the interviewer, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "But there's so much good out there if you look for it. People have shown us that love is stronger than hate." While Sarah and Ethan worked on healing, Karen's life spiraled further into chaos. Facing mounting legal fees and unable to find employment due to her tarnished reputation, she retreated from public view. Her attempts to defend herself online only made matters worse. Every comment or post she made was met with backlash, leaving her more isolated than ever. Friends and colleagues distanced themselves, unwilling to associate with someone whose name had become synonymous with cruelty. Rumors swirled about her financial troubles, with reports suggesting she might lose her luxury car and home due to mounting debts. Despite everything Karen had done, Sarah refused to let bitterness take root in her heart. In interviews, she emphasized the importance of moving forward rather than dwelling on anger. "Karma has a way of balancing things," she said simply. "I don't need to carry resentment. It's heavy, and it doesn't help me or my kids heal." Her words resonated deeply with those following the story, inspiring countless conversations about forgiveness and accountability. As weeks turned into months, Sarah noticed a subtle shift, not just in her own life, but in the way people approached kindness and compassion. The incident had sparked something bigger than anyone expected, a movement to stand up against bullying and advocate for individuals with disabilities. Schools invited Sarah to speak about resilience and inclusion, while advocacy groups reached out to collaborate on projects aimed at creating safer spaces for vulnerable communities. What had begun as a personal tragedy had transformed into a catalyst for change, proving that even in the darkest moments, light can emerge and shine brighter than ever before. Months passed, and the day of Karen's trial finally arrived. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation, packed with reporters, supporters of Sarah and Ethan, and curious onlookers eager to see how justice would be served. Sarah sat in the front row, holding Ethan's hand tightly as they waited for the proceedings to begin. Despite everything they'd been through, she felt a strange sense of calm, not because she wanted revenge, but because she knew this moment was about more than just them. It was about accountability, fairness, and sending a message that no one, regardless of their status or wealth, is above the law. When Karen entered the room, escorted by her lawyer, she looked nothing like the confident, entitled woman who had stormed through the mall parking lot months earlier. Her designer clothes were replaced with a plain blouse and skirt, her once perfect hair pulled back into a loose ponytail. She avoided making eye contact with anyone, especially Sarah and Ethan, as if ashamed, or perhaps still in denial, about what she had done. But there was no escaping the truth now. Witnesses were called to testify, each recounting the events of that fateful afternoon in vivid detail. One shopper described how Karen had screamed at Sarah over a scratch, so minor it could barely be seen. Another recalled the horrified gasps from bystanders when Karen pulled out the pepper spray. A security guard recounted restraining her after the attack, noting how unapologetic she seemed even then. The most emotional testimony came from Sarah herself. Standing at the stand, she spoke clearly and calmly, painting a picture of the fear and helplessness she felt watching her son suffer. "Ethan didn't deserve that," she said, her voice steady despite the tears glistening in her eyes. "He's a happy, loving boy who didn't ask for any of this. What Karen did wasn't just cruel, it was unnecessary." Ethan also gave a brief statement, though he struggled to get through it without choking up. "I thought I did something wrong," he admitted softly, his small voice echoing in the quiet courtroom. "But my mom says I didn't, and I know now that what happened wasn't fair." His words struck a chord with everyone present, leaving not a dry eye in the room. Even the judge seemed moved, nodding solemnly as Ethan stepped down. Karen's defense team tried to argue that she had acted out of fear and frustration, claiming she believed Ethan posed a threat to her property. But their arguments fell flat, undermined by video evidence showing Karen's aggressive behavior and lack of provocation. When it was Karen's turn to speak, she offered a half-hearted apology, insisting she hadn't intended to hurt anyone. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice trembling. "But I never meant for things to go this far." The judge, however, wasn't convinced. After deliberating, he delivered his verdict. Guilty on all charges, Karen was sentenced to probation, ordered to complete mandatory anger management classes, and required to perform community service working with disabled individuals. He emphasized that her actions were unacceptable and warned that any future misconduct would result in harsher penalties. "This case serves as a reminder," he concluded, addressing the court, "that we must treat others with empathy and respect, regardless of our circumstances." Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Sarah and Ethan, eager for their reaction. Sarah smiled faintly, clutching Ethan close. "We're grateful for the outcome," she said, her tone measured but sincere. "Today isn't about punishment. It's about learning and growing. I hope this experience helps Karen reflect on her actions and become a better person." For Ethan, the trial marked a turning point. While he still remembered the pain and fear of that day, he also recognized the strength he found within himself and the incredible support he'd received from strangers turned friends. As they walked away from the courthouse together, hand in hand, Sarah glanced down at her son and smiled. They had endured unimaginable hardship, but they had emerged stronger, braver, and more united than ever. And as they stepped into the sunlight, ready to embrace whatever came next, it was clear that their story was far from over. It was just beginning. In the months that followed the trial, life began to settle into a new rhythm for Sarah and Ethan. The scars of that day at the mall would always remain, both visible and invisible, but they were no longer defined by anger or fear. Instead, they carried forward with a renewed sense of purpose, using their experience as a platform to inspire others. Sarah became an advocate for disability awareness, speaking at schools, community centers, and conferences about the importance of empathy, inclusion, and standing up against injustice. Her speeches resonated deeply, not just because of the raw honesty in her words, but because she never let bitterness take root. "We can't control what happens to us," she often said, her voice steady and full of conviction, "but we can choose how we respond." Ethan, too, found his own way to shine. Encouraged by the outpouring of support he'd received, he started sharing his story through art. With the help of a local art teacher, he began creating colorful drawings and paintings that captured moments of joy despite adversity. One piece, titled *Wheels of Hope*, depicted a smiling boy in a wheelchair surrounded by a crowd of cheering people. It quickly gained attention online, inspiring countless viewers who saw it as a symbol of resilience and kindness. An art gallery even offered to feature his work in a special exhibition dedicated to celebrating underrepresented voices. For Ethan, this was more than just recognition. It was proof that his voice mattered. Meanwhile, Karen's life continued to unravel. Her probation required her to complete hundreds of hours of community service, much of which involved working directly with disabled individuals. At first, she approached these tasks begrudgingly, clearly uncomfortable and resistant. But over time, something shifted. Whether it was the patience shown by those she served or the quiet dignity they carried in the face of challenges, Karen slowly began to see the world and herself through a different lens. She started attending anger management classes not just to fulfill her legal obligations, but because she genuinely wanted to change. Though rebuilding trust would take years, if not decades, she seemed determined to make amends in whatever small ways she could. The media coverage of the case eventually died down, but its impact lingered. Inspired by Sarah and Ethan's courage, communities across the country launched initiatives aimed at fostering greater understanding and acceptance of people with disabilities. Schools incorporated lessons on empathy and inclusion into their curriculums, while businesses pledged to create more accessible environments for all customers. Even lawmakers took notice, introducing legislation to strengthen protections for vulnerable populations. What had begun as a single act of cruelty had sparked a movement, a ripple effect of positivity and change that touched lives far beyond Sarah and Ethan's immediate circle. For Sarah, the transformation was bittersweet. On one hand, she felt immense pride knowing that her family's ordeal had inspired so much good. On the other hand, she couldn't help but wish none of it had ever happened. Still, she reminded herself daily that focusing on gratitude was key to moving forward. Karma isn't always loud or flashy, she told Ethan one evening as they sat together watching the sunset. Sometimes it's quiet, like the love we've gotten from strangers, or the chance to help others feel seen and valued. As time went on, Ethan grew taller, stronger, and braver. He learned to navigate the world with confidence, buoyed by the knowledge that he wasn't alone. People still approached him in public sometimes, asking if he was the boy from the news, and telling him how much his story meant to them. Each time, he responded with a shy smile and a simple thank you, grateful for the connections he'd made along the way. And though Sarah knew life would continue throwing curveballs, she faced each day with hope. After all, she'd already witnessed firsthand how goodness could triumph over cruelty, how compassion could outweigh hatred, and how even in the darkest moments, light could find its way through. As she tucked Ethan into bed one night, she kissed his forehead and whispered softly, "No matter what happens, we'll always have each other, and that's enough." Because sometimes, the greatest victories aren't about punishment or revenge. They're about rising above, finding strength in vulnerability, and proving that love will always prevail.